Hey, South Africa, are you ready for President Patrice Motsepe? Well, if you're not, you probably should start getting ready. Let me explain to you why Patrice Motsepe is going to be the next president of South Africa. Well, as we all know, the ANC got a snort clap in the general election of 2024, losing their outright majority that they've had for 30 years, dropping all the way down to 40%. This, together with their backers and the business community in South Africa, forced them into the coalition with the Democratic Alliance. In order to make it a little bit more palatable, they called it a government of unity and invited in a couple of other smaller parties just to make it look like it wasn't a coalition. Of course, this served another purpose, and that was that the ANC were able to make it look like they're the only ones that are in charge, because they relegated the DA, IFP, the bigger parties, into just another voice amongst the other 9 parties. And for the rest of 2024, the ANC had a whale of a time, ruling as if nothing had really changed. They also passed a whole lot of bills that had been voted for in the previous administration, when the ANC still had a majority, that they knew were going to be contentious with their GNU partners, things like National Health Insurance that would bankrupt us, the Bella Act, which has got some controversial parts to it, and then, of course, most damagingly, the Expropriation Act, or as the ANC likes to say, the Not Expropriation Act. So the ANC were going along just fine, but in the meantime, there was a lot of resentment building with its GNU partners, because the ANC were really behaving like they had a majority. And then life got very, very real in 2025, and it all started around the budget, where once again the ANC wanted to act like they had a majority, but they didn't. And they chose the dumbest thing in the world to do. Instead of just stealing the money, as they've been doing for all of these years, they decided that they needed more money to steal, so they were going to increase VAT. And everybody else knows how the story ends. It ends with the ANC spinning out of control as they try and explain to people how they care for the poor while raising VAT. And the parties that are opposed to the VAT increase, in actual fact, are the ones that don't care for the poor. And I'm still trying to work out the logic of that. But the bottom line is that the ANC lost a lot of ground and will hemorrhage support because of this budget issue. So, what happened next? Well, suddenly our politics has changed dramatically, as the ANC fights this new enemy from within, the other parties that have found their voices, that have realized that this is not a behemoth that we can't challenge. This is the ANC, and they are just another party, and in fact they're a party in disarray. Now, let's remember that in addition to the ANC working quite poorly with its GNU partners on the issue of the budget, the acts that I've explained to you, they did try. And the budget thing started the process all over again, where they spoke to other parties, largely MK Party, EFF. Now, why didn't they form a GNU with those parties? Well, quite simply, they realized that those parties had a tremendous problem with the ANC. For starters, they come out of the ANC. And both MK Party and EFF have got one particular problem, and his name is Cyril Ramaphosa. The problem that they have with Cyril Ramaphosa is that Cyril Ramaphosa was the guy who managed to kick out both Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema. If you recall, starting off with Malema, it was Cyril Ramaphosa who headed up the disciplinary committee that ultimately expelled Julius Malema, which forced him to start the EFF. And then just a few years later, it was Cyril Ramaphosa as deputy president of the country and newly elected president in 2017 that decided that we must recall President Jacob Zuma. Now, in both cases, you've got guys with massive egos. One guy has managed to kick the one guy out of the party, kick the other guy out of the presidency. Doesn't create for a happy family. On top of it, These are parties with really unstable policies that are going to hurt the country. So the ANC are in this deal with the DA and others and really find it unpalatable. So, in addition to all of these problems, the ANC don't have a lot of places to turn. Every opinion poll shows that the ANC are in decline. 40% would be a good result for the ANC. Some polls put them as low as nearly 30%. They're losing every by-election they contest. They know that people dislike certain things like corruption, but they can't bring themselves to do anything about it. We had the wonderful case of Thembi Simelane, a minister with a checkered past when it comes to her financial dealings. Instead of firing her, President Ramaphosa moves her to a different ministry. I mean, this kind of thing you can't make up. Then we've got the issue of the lived reality for South Africa. Party remains in charge, but South Africa's unemployment keeps growing and the economy goes nowhere. On top of it, that wonderful term that we call service delivery in South Africa, what everybody else in the world calls doing your job, is in disarray. Load shedding comes back from time to time. You turn on the tap, nothing comes out. Potholes in the street. And the ANC just doesn't seem to have the wherewithal to do anything about it. On top of that, we've got a diplomatic problem where we've managed to irritate the newly installed US President Donald Trump. Why? Because of race-based policies and because of our support for Iran. So, needless to say, they've got themselves as a party into a hell of a mess. What can be done about this hell of a mess? Quite simply, you go outside. Quite clearly, the people inside the party either don't have the will, the wherewithal, or the ability to deal with their problems. So you get somebody from outside. And you hope that this new guy can come in and say, hey, I'm not from this party, I'm from business, I'll fix it up. And you transfer the problem there. So, who is Patrice Motsepe? Well, for starters, in South Africa, we would call him a businessman. In any other country, you'd call him an oligarch. And I use that term advisedly because an oligarch basically gets their money from taking what were state-owned businesses or other businesses and just becoming owners of those businesses. They sort of inherit a business, not one that they started. That is a major difference, major differential. Patrice Motsepe got his start with the Royal Bafokeng, which is the community out in the Northwest Province sitting on huge platinum deposits. And he managed the business of the Royal Bafokeng and along the way has created a hell of a business. Because he did something very different. When he inherited the business, he didn't gut the business and he didn't steal all the assets. In actual fact, he kept the business intact. He kept the management intact. He enhanced management. He enhanced the talent. I don't think he complies with all of the BE regulations because I don't think he has to because he's politically connected. So his businesses have been very successful and along the way he has become extraordinarily wealthy. Created jobs, done all of those things. Good for him. But now we get onto the political side. Why do I think that Patrice Motsepe, who must surely be happy and comfortable with his billions of rand, why would he want to get involved in politics? Well, because he then gets into the world of football, soccer. As we know, South Africa's most popular sport. And Patrice Motsepe does it in a different way once again. We've seen a lot of rich people buy soccer teams. And in South Africa, it's not to improve the team, it's to improve your own, Facebook profile. But he bought Mamelodi Sundowns and turned them from a goodish team into the undisputed champions of football. We basically start the season wondering who's going to come second. But under Patrice Motsepe's guidance, Mamelodi Sundowns has become the best coached, the best resourced, the best managed team with the best players. I mean, they win the league by extraordinary distances. So he got involved in that. Okay, great. But then what really proves that he has ambitions that go beyond business and Mamelodi Sundowns, he's become the president of the Confederation of African Football, CAF. Now, in Africa, much like in Europe, soccer has become politics. And by doing so, and by doing a good job by all accounts, Patrice Motsepe has gained a continental following, right? He's done really, really well. And it's not going to be long before people start saying, wow, if this guy can run football in Africa, which has historically been a mess, perhaps he can run South Africa. Well, let's just say he did decide that this was a good idea. How do you go about it? Well, in South Africa, he's got a profile, and where else are you going to have a profile? Invariably, people who become presidents either have a political profile, or in some cases a military profile, or a business profile, or maybe even in this case a sporting profile. But this is where he has already got the profile, so we can tick that box. The next step is that you start getting the word out, floating the idea. Could Patrice Motsepe be the next president of South Africa? And you see that if South Africans don't vomit on the newspaper, they think it's quite a good idea, you're onto something. And that has started, that process has started. There's already articles appearing. Recently an article in News 24, hey, what about President Motsepe? So the media campaign, the softly campaign, has begun. Okay, the next step you need to do is you have to wait. Because who are the alternatives in South Africa? Well, we have a deputy president of the ANC and deputy president of the country, Paul Mashatile. But my word, this guy smells worse than a 2-year-old open tin of tuna. There's a constant stench about him. He doesn't have a great legacy, history. He was a terrible premier of Gauteng. He was a terrible cabinet minister. He seems to have also had a personality lobotomy where, he just has no presence. I'm not sure he brings a voting bloc. He's a very, very divisive character. And of course, he's extremely chummy with some of the foes of the ANC, namely the EFF and MK. So I think that Paul Mashatile is probably the least likely person to become the next president of the ANC and likely president of the country. Who else have we got? Well, we've got the one and only Fikile Mbalula. Now, Fikile Mbalula, let's not forget, was a disastrous cabinet minister. I mean, as Minister of Transport, he watched while live on TV, the South African rail infrastructure was carried away live on television, and he did nothing about it. So what did the ANC decide to do? They decided to promote him. And they made him Secretary General of the ANC, which is roughly the CEO of the party. Since then, they've lurched from one disaster to another. It's not a financial disaster. The party's in a mess. He talks very, very animatedly, but not too many people think that there's much there. So I doubt if he's going to get support. Who else? Ronald Lamola, our Minister of International Relations. Well, he was the guy responsible for the ICJ case that has caused our problems with the USA. He's also the guy in charge of our international relations that made great decisions like sending Ibrahim Rasool to the US or renaming Santon Drive. So this guy, who also comes out of the same personality factory that Paul Mashatile visited, I doubt if he's a serious player. You've got a couple of other people there, but nobody in the ANC is allowed to distinguish themselves, and it's not exactly the hotbed of talent. So I don't think Patrice Motsepe has got a lot of competitors in the field. Which brings us to the next steps for him to become president. You wait. This is the hardest bit, and that is that you wait. You wait until it becomes clear that the ANC it becomes clear to the ANC that they're so desperate for another leader, or it becomes so clear to the country that they want anybody else but those people that I've mentioned. You wait. What is going to be the trigger point? Well, the trigger point is probably going to be the 2026 local government election, where the ANC is going to get another snot clock. As I said, they're losing every by-election, they're down in every poll. They don't care about local government, therefore, who is going to vote for them? So they're going to get a hammering there. And this will suddenly lead to a whole realignment within the ANC. And suddenly somebody will float the idea of saying, let's get somebody from outside of the party, somebody who is friendly to the party. And let's remember, Motsepe has always been one of the biggest donors to the ANC. And this in an age where the ANC is probably going to need all the money it can get. So not only are you getting a president, but you're probably getting the guy who's going to fund the campaign as well. And then you get somebody quite senior in the party to push the idea. And who better but your brother-in-law, who happens to be the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa. He suddenly touts this as a good idea. He gets his team of people to push the idea. Eventually it becomes the only idea. Right? The ANC is desperate to survive. And the only way they're going to do it is by doing something that we're not considering at the moment. And I think the only thing that they could do that could lead to a survival is to bring somebody like Patrice Motsepe. Does this have any precedent? Well, actually, the closest you get to this, oddly enough, comes out of Italy, where Silvio Berlusconi, who you may recall was a very controversial prime minister of Italy for the longest that anybody's ever been a leader of the country, really connected with the population of Italy because he owned AC Milan football team after he had made all of his money out of media largely and other businesses. But that link, that football link, made him incredibly popular. Look, Silvio Berlusconi was a very charismatic guy, a bit of some comparisons with Donald Trump. He was a guy whose speeches you wanted to listen to. Patrice Motsepe, I don't think I've ever sat through a speech that he's given, but at least there's that connection. In Africa, we've seen a lot of business people become presidents. So I don't think this is ridiculous. My money for the next president of the ANC, who will most likely still be the most supported party, not the majority party, the support will probably slip, will be Patrice Motsepe. Will it be good for the country? Hey, we backed the so-called businessman the last time, and it hasn't worked out too well. But that businessman really was just a shareholder. Patrice Motsepe at least has been a businessman. So you never know. And, as they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So let's hope. We can only live in hope. But I sincerely believe that the next leader of the ANC will be Patrice Motsepe. So, if you've stayed on this long, you will want to join us for our next live State of the Nation event, which happens on the 25th of June at the Sandton Convention Centre, where we'll have JJ Tabani and Neil De Beer as our guest speakers at that event. So if you want to book your table or come along to that event, the details are in the description below. And come and join us and you'll really enjoy that. But I'd like to thank Pace Car Rental for keeping us going. And to you, the viewer and the subscribers, and let's hope that you all subscribed, for making this one of the fastest growing platforms in South Africa. We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you.